Yura and his girlfriend Alir were at home in a spacious two-room apartment. At the moment they were in the kitchen, Alir stood at the sink, doing dishwashing, and Yura sat at the table, leaning on the sofa and focused on watching her, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. Finally, not holding back, he opened his mouth, but not a single sound came out of it. He looked at her and after a few seconds spoke, not taking his eyes off her graceful figure. I want to say I'm sorry you feel uncomfortable during our sex. I've already tried a lot of different ways to make you enjoy yourself, but none of that helps. What are you leading to? She interrupted and began to wash the dishes quickly without turning around. I said, nothing can be changed here. You're talking right. Yes, the reason is me. She maintained a friendly tone. Because everything suits you. She never turned around. He looked at her as she washed the dishes. His gaze did not come off. But soon he was tired of observations and leaned over, put his hands on the table, and began to play with his fingers. He was silent. At that moment, Alia turned to him. No way, no. Everything is fine, I don't need it. However, he could not break away from his hobby, picking burrs. He didn't pay attention to her or see or react. He stared at his fingers for 5 seconds, then slowly turned his head, following the smooth trajectory of the infinity symbol. With his lips clenched and nervous, he finally answered. After long observations, I noticed that you show more energy, playfulness, and attention when you are in the society of other men. A few months ago, at a water park, someone approached you to meet you. I did not specifically intervene, but only watched. Your eyes stared intently at this bodybuilder, and you'd taught along and enthusiastic. He turned away from her even more, even almost turned his back on her, and there he stared at his palm, looking at the lines of life. And Ollier answered him behind his back. Moreover, her voice sounded the same from afar, so he realized she did not turn. He came up to me himself. We were just talking, with no requests or hints. Then he asked if I had a boyfriend and I said I came with you. Jura did not look at her, took the phone and began to read the news on social networks, quickly and nervously scrolling his finger down. And only a few seconds later he said, without raising his voice or taking his eyes off the screen, then why when I came up he said I was just a friend. He noticed her movement in peripheral vision. Without turning her head, he cast a side gaze at her and saw how Ollier left the washing of dishes, turned and leaned with her ass on the countertop, resting her hands on top. He stared at the phone. 5 seconds later, she said, I don't remember him saying anything like that. Maybe it was just his joke or word play and you got it wrong. And also asked me what I did 2 years ago on the same day. He did not look at her. From the side there were sounds of washing up again. About 10 more seconds passed before he said casually, we men often feel a desire to meet a beautiful woman, and you, for sure, also sometimes dream of a pleasant pastime with an attractive guy. I pay attention to this precisely because, however, she did not let him complete her thought by uttering her words in a loud voice. I don't know where you got such accusations. At that time the sound of water stopped, and Yura turned around to find out what she was doing. Ollier vigorously wiped the wash and countertop. It seems to me that I am in prison, she continued, and Yura immediately turned away, as if he was afraid that his gaze would be noticed. Everything inside me hurts and whines. I want to go somewhere, have fun, relax, but I can't. I can't afford even the easiest thing, to have coffee in the evening with my friends in a restaurant. It's like punishment. Yura moved to the very end of the sofa and leaned against its back. Facing him, he was turned towards all, but his eyes were lowered to a mobile phone screen. He threw one foot on the sofa, smugly gushed under his nose and clearly said, looking in front of him at the phone, You have a different desire, don't you? You want to go to a restaurant with your girlfriends to meet a man. Yura did not pay attention to her, but heard how she immediately reacted. No, that's not true. Then there was a rumble and something metal fell into the sink. Yura looked up and noticed how she headed for the bedroom, lazily rising to follow her. Yura was stopped in his motion when Alia returned. He slowly fell to his place and looked at her thoughtfully, smiling at his snow-white teeth. He recovered awkwardly in his chair and was now blaming himself for this awkward pose. Not paying attention to him, she went to the hanging locker, where there were stored cereals. A locker was located above the countertop, next to the plate dryer. Alia opened it and quickly began to take the cans out of there, placing them on the table. Absorbed in the work, she replied, "You treat me especially well to prevent me from leaving. You are an insidious and cunning manipulator. Pull the strings and control people, make them do what you need. You specially furnished everything so as to make me dependent and mock me. You are focused only on yourself, and I feel that my own needs are ignored. I feel compelled to obey and prioritize your desires, while my own are neglected." She was passionate about the work and did not pay attention to it. Yura deepened into his phone, calmly said, "I understand that the truth can cause irritation and annoyance. You women want to hide this truth from us men, and it's probably most annoying that we don't turn out to be as stupid as you originally imagined this to be. We all understand, see and know, and are not afraid to speak directly and frankly. Please stop hoping that you can belittle us and start communicating with us as equals." Yura calmly expected a reaction. His eyes were close to her, his head did not rise. She pulled all the cans out of the locker and put them on the table. She then pulled the chair up, climbed it, and began to thoroughly clean the shelves, doing so silently, with focus and vigor. Yura watched her movements for about 20 seconds, but she continued to remain silent. Then he returned the look to his phone and just as gently continued the conversation. "There is no need to be so offended. I understand that it can be hard. When relationships with one partner begin to get bored, there is often a desire to try something new with someone else." Yura listened attentively as she threw something on the countertop again, perhaps a rag, judging by the sound. He looked up slowly and suddenly saw her beautiful face there. Their views met, full of a test of curiosity. She looked at him with her hands on her sides and asked, "Why are you so worried about these thoughts?" He answered expressively and confidently, continuing to look into her eyes, "When my partner begins to flirt with other people, even when I am nearby, I have doubts about the strength of our connection. The thought comes to me that if flirting is not enough, the issue worries a lot of people and I'm starting to get nervous about it, which strains my nerves a lot. I want peace of mind and confidence in the future, but instead I'm constantly worried that you might be interested in someone else. I don't know what's in your head, but these problems arise only because of you and have nothing to do with my most ordinary and simple needs." She turned away from me and crouched down behind a rag. Then she resolutely rose and began to diligently wipe something on the shelf. "I don't know what you're talking about. Not all people or what you think. You don't need to see a catch in everything and put everyone under one category." Yura looked at her back and, after she finished talking, lowered his eyes to the screen of her phone to answer. He maintained a calm tone. "But still, tell me about how you met that bodybuilder in the water park and why I spoke to him for so long and kindly." He didn't see her, but she told him, "I didn't do anything improper. We just talked. In addition, it was not me who approached him, but he approached me." "Stop making me make excuses." Yuri grinned slightly. A small smile slipped through his face, raising the corners of his lips. "Okay, let's miss it. He was an interesting interlocutor, right? Your conversations flowed easily. You glowed with laughter, and I watched you anxiously. She was silent for 5 seconds, and only now she seemed to remember that something needed to be answered. She said, "Well, he told something, showed on the phone, joked, but I didn't pay much attention and didn't remember." She did something. He felt the fluctuation of the air and involuntarily raised his head to see what was happening. She gently returned the jars to the locker, then wiped the kitchen countertop and headed to the bedroom. He immediately got up and followed her. In the bedroom, Oliver approached the bed and began to spread the blanket. She was usually lazy and difficult to get her off the couch, but when she was nervous or afraid, she always began to actively clean up and arrange order to calm down. Yura stood on the doorstep and watched her work. Oliver was not distracted. He stared stubbornly at her for about 20 seconds before finally saying, "I already guessed that you will not find anything wrong in friendly communication with a pumped-up stranger." She neatly spread the blanket in front of her, waved it to lay it on the bed, and began to correct the corners. Consumed by the case, she responded without looking in his direction. "Will you haunt me?" Yura did not avert his eyes and persistently continued, "And if the next time you go to the water park with your friends, is such a guy suitable? Maybe after the roller coaster I'll give you a ride home, and on the way we'll catch somewhere and have a coffee." Alia laughed cheerfully, with a bright smile on her face, carefully placed a pillow at the head of the bed. With a slightly nervous look, she smiled again and switched sides to repeat her actions with a second pillow. Starting the case, she uttered words, with a tone of sadness in her voice. "You're painting a picture that's too idealized. It's not realistic," he said sharply. "That's why I'm worried about how you behave with others in my absence. It might be the perfect scenario for you, but it's a scary nightmare for any man." Oliver changed the pillowcase with speed and determination, not paying attention to his presence. Yura watched it for 10 seconds, could not stand the silence, and finally said, "You are silent, but I know you understand what I'm talking about. Do you want to try to be with someone other than me, didn't you?" Oliver turned, met his gaze, and could not restrain her laughter. Looking at him, she waved her head negatively and said, "Oh, Yuri, what are your jokes?" Saying that, she turned away and continued to put on a clean pillowcase, although it wasn't until 2 days ago that a clean bed was made. Wearing a pillow, she added, "I'm not going to answer such questions. Just ridiculous." Her movements became tense and fast, surprising Jura. He asked the question, "Why are you so surprised?" In seriously asking. She did not pay attention to him and silently finished laying the pillow, then went to the window cupboard. Yura came closer to be able to watch her. He glanced his attentive gaze at her for 15 seconds, while she opened the cupboard doors and viewed its contents with curiosity. Without words, she continued to look only at the closet. Yura continued the conversation. "If you like to flirt and do not see anything bad in it, then I do not understand what the problem is. We can go to a nightclub, you can communicate with men, flirt, do whatever you want. If you think that I should be calm about this, then everything should look like this. Perhaps even having sex with a stranger is considered the norm for you if you see nothing wrong even with flirting." She turned away from the cupboard and glanced at the floor where the bed linen she had just removed was lying. Having gathered him in a comber, she carried him to the bathroom, bypassing Yura and not paying attention to him. In the bathroom, she started putting all things in the washing machine. Yura followed her and from the doorstep to the bathroom continued to observe her work. Ollie silently put things in the washing machine, but could not keep her words. "It looks like you won't let me go until you get what you want." Yura was silent, but his gaze was still eager for her. Ollie carefully put all the objects in the drum, took a pack of powder and suddenly said, without distraction from the matter, "What is so bad and terrible about sex? It's a natural and normal part of life. All people are doing this, including you. But sex with a stranger is a past experience." Yura bulged his eyes, took up his head with two hands, turned away and swirled in the corridor around his axis. "Oh, how difficult and intense all this is," he hissed under his breath, not even trying to watch or see him or not. "Wow," he exhaled and threw his hands down. "Fa," he repeated again. And when Yura was in the highest tension and ate from a nervous breakdown, Ollie calmly passed him from the bathroom to the bedroom. He followed. Externally, Ollie did not give any reaction to his words. She went to the closet with clothes and began to beautifully put things on a shelf. Yura watched her closely, and she said, without distracting her gaze from things, "What a horror. It is impossible to hide from you. You will get everywhere." "No," Yura shouted. "I'm too stressed and nervous." Ollie was silent, carefully stacking things for a few seconds before finally saying the answer. "What do you need from me? What do you get from me?" He approached gently from behind, wrapped his hands around her waist and touched her neck with his lips. The words he whispered in his ear were filled with desire and passion, but at the same time he understood that this was not the right moment for this conversation. "I'm too stressed now and it feels like it could help me relax, but I don't want to force you into something if you're not ready. Let's change the theme and just enjoy our time together." He affectionately placed his hand on her ass, realizing that this intimacy could be sufficient for both. Despite all the hindrances, Ollie continued to put things together without being distracted from work. "Why do you talk so much about all these topics? Can I be calmer when I communicate with someone else other than you?" she asked. Yura squeezed her body even more tightly, filling her arms with strength and passion. "No, no, no," he whispered in her ear, tense and heartfelt. "You don't understand as men that much. You women think that the attention of the other guy is absolutely normal and take it calmly. Let's talk about it later. Now I just want sex. I can't hold back." He carefully slipped his hand under her dress, while the other hand carefully hugged her chest. She did not resist, did not try to push him away, but he decided to lift her into the air to put her near the bed. He gently seated her on the edge of the bed, exerting a little pressure. Moving frantically, Yura quickly took off his underpants and took his penis in his hand. With his second hand, he held her by the shoulders and began to move forward. She turned away and covered her mouth with her palm. "Well, Ollie, what's the matter? Help me relax. You're guilty of everything." Your words pulled my nerves like steel ropes. "I'm worried about our relationship. I need to calm down," he said, trying to convince her. "What have I just said now?" she replied, trying to avoid an unpleasant situation. He gently walked a member along her neck, and then took her hand and carefully placed it on his device, overcoming resistance. "You can choose words more thoughtfully next time." He touched the back of her head lightly, trying to lead her head to his body. She tried to resist, but under his persistence could not resist and turned, looked at the head in front of her and gently pressed her lips to her. Yura froze admiringly, paying tribute to her amazing talent. He loosened his grip, and Ollie independently began to perform oral sex. After completing their affairs, they both headed to the bathroom for a shower. When everything was ready, Yura left the bathroom and returned to the kitchen. He sat down at the table, took his phone and continued to watch the news. Ollie went about her business in the bedroom and soon laid down on the bed, which was clear in the sounds. 2 days have passed since that conversation. Yura returned from work and sat down in the kitchen, having dinner and watching the news. Passing from the corridor, he noticed Ollie lying in the bedroom, playing the phone. A few minutes later, she entered the kitchen, sat opposite him. Yura looked up to see what was happening, and then returned to the phone. This was repeated several times, but none of them started the conversation. 3 minutes passed. She was still silent, sitting next to him for no apparent purpose, and only now she spoke. You know, she began. Yura glanced at her. She did not take her eyes off her nails, doing their consideration and adjustment. Do you mind if I go with the girls to have fun somewhere? On Friday, they get together and invited me in. We have not gone anywhere for more than a month. He looked at Ollier and immediately turned away, gushed, and said nothing. They had been silent for 30 seconds when he finally answered. I said everything last time I wanted to. He kept his eyes on the phone. You want to make me nervous again. You know where it's going to go. Don't start. Yura finished, washed his plate behind him, and settled into the corner of the sofa, threw his feet at him, and focused on the phone, without taking his eyes off. Suddenly he heard a deep sigh and glanced at Alia. She leaned over to her slipper and spoke without taking her eyes off her shoes. This Friday, the girls invited me to go somewhere to dance together. A smile appeared on Ewer's face, similar to a grin. He kept his eyes on the phone screen and answered her. Oh, you're so cunning. She doesn't understand anything that I'm talking about. No, honey, there's no fools here. If you want to go to a nightclub, you want to eat a fatter fish, I'll go with you. I can just be around behind the bar, and your girlfriends won't even understand who I am. He looked at her again, noting that her fingers and hands were almost trembling, and she was slowly picking a cuticle. She put her elbows on the table and smiled slightly. I don't like constant control and suspicion. Why do you consider me a depraved woman? Okay, I got it. He met her look, but she turned away. It looks like you want to repeat our previous conversation. If you like it that way, I'll get up. Her fingers trembled nervously as she made her way to find a comfortable position in her palm. Finally, she found the right position and stopped hushing her fingers. Looking at him, she said, Yura, that's wrong. I'm not asking for much. He could not take his eyes off her. I'm not going to cause trouble, and I just want to make sure no one else bothers you. That's all. It's cruelty. It's intolerable. I won't be able to sustain it for a long time. She grabbed her head, covered her ears, and began to shake her to the sides in complete despair. But Yura did not remain indifferent to her suffering. He stood up, took a chair, sat next to her and hugged her, trying to calm her with 2 hands. Olcher, no one prevents you from communicating with your friends. Oh, I don't mind. Well, why can't I make sure that no one will bother you? He said, trying to relieve her unbearable load. He still shook her head negatively, but remained in his arms. I don't want to be controlled. It's impossible. It's unbearable, she whispered, straightening herself and looking into his eyes. Perhaps then we will part better. Yura was amazed and his face expressed great amazement. He straightened up, his eyes wide open, reflecting his extreme fear. No, but why are you saying such things? We have an ideal relationship. We do everything together. We have enough money. We have an apartment, a car. We have everything. Are you really willing to sacrifice it all for some club hangouts? She looked into his eyes and said with confidence, yes, I am tired of this ideality, rules and duties. Come here. Don't go there. You can do it. And you can't do it. I can't live like this anymore. I want to do what I like and not be limited to constant bans. If you just want to visit nightclubs and communicate with friends, come on. After all, I do not make obstacles for this, but you're clearly not content with that option. So you're going to do something you can't do in my presence. And so you don't want me to be there, right? She squeezed her lips and shook her head negatively. No, that's not true. You don't understand at all. I'm just tired. I don't want our relationship to continue the way it is now. I want freedom, and our communication with you has become a prison for me. But why are you tired? We have everything. I treat you well and love you. I'm not demanding anything from you. The only thing I want is that you do not communicate with other men. That's all. But why? I don't understand that. These are just friends and colleagues. How can I not connect with other people at work? It's just not possible. We're all right. Why do you have such suspicions? If I wanted something, you wouldn't know anything anyway. Yura got up and started walking back and forth in the kitchen. All right, that's right. So if you want to go to a nightclub on Friday and if you don't, she met him with a glance. Then, probably, we need to think about our future. Yura continued to walk around the room, expressing his dissatisfaction. No, I'll never let you go, nowhere. Don't hope so. And by the way, do you want me to just sit at home and wait for you? If you want, you can also go somewhere to have fun with friends. I don't mind having fun. Do whatever you want. I have nothing to limit you. I trust you. Har har har. Let's talk about you now. I will call you every half hour via video link. And if you don't answer, then I will assume that you are thinking about something with someone else. No, you don't have to call me that often. It's absurd. I'll be back home myself. He clenched his fists, strained his whole body, and sat on the floor in this state. Oh, how you make me nervous. How am I going to know you're not spending time with someone in a place like this? That's not what I'm going for. I'm already tired of hearing these conversations and suspicions. Why do we need such a relationship? He looked at the floor. Look, let's not start. I have already said that I think you will not leave me. I will not let go. But now I will deal with you exactly just like last time. I'm very stressed. I'm very nervous. He was waving his finger at her. She smiled slightly, looked at him, and spread her hands. What's going on? She asked. But Ewer had already lowered his pants and exposed his erect penis. In this form, he approached her. Nothing important, just so that you know what impact your conversations about clubs have on men. He replied. You see what all this leads to every time. He came to her face and stopped very close. If you want to be at the club, you need to deserve. Here's a pass in front of you, he said. She smiled with restraint and sometimes glanced at his penis. Is that a must? She asked. Of course. Come on. He took her by the back of the head and began to pull towards his penis, overcoming her resistance. She did not want and resisted and looked at him. He stopped. She pulled his hand aside and said, Wait, don't push it. It's superfluous. Good. He put his hand away. Yulia sat down more comfortably, took the penis with her fingers and twisted them to examine from all sides. Then she put him under her nose, opened her mouth, and let him inside. And that's when she started doing a blow job. And Yura, as always, enjoyed what was happening.